Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are super excited to have everyone here. We hope you're having a great day. If you can, take a second and let us know where you're coming from in the chat. Say hello, say hi to friends, all that good stuff. Everyone is ready for November and hopefully some real fall weather. I know here in the Midwest, it's been not a fall at all. It's been very hot, so I'm ready for some cool, crisp weather. Some pumpkin spice lattes, you know, all the good fall things. I guess that's another good question we can ask in the chat. What's your favorite part about fall? Halloween, raking leaves. It's not raking leaves for me.
Budget planning, you know.
Budget planning is a big part. Definitely a big part. And then before we know it, it'll be winter and the holidays, and we'll be right into 2024. It's crazy. All right, well, it looks like we've got a pretty good audience here today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Jennifer Millett. I'm the Vice President of Event Strategy and Partnerships. I work closely with Access to bring you good content and great webinars like the one we have today. If you're not an ARMA member, we highly encourage you to go check out arma.org and see all the good things that we have to offer. If you are an ARMA member joining us today, thank you so much for utilizing your membership and taking advantage of all the opportunities that are available to you. We will have, this is great for new and old or anyone, interested in becoming a member. We've got our ARMA overview webinar, which is just a good walkthrough of our website, the resources we have available, ways to utilize your membership, connect with other people within the community. And that's always held on the first Wednesday of the month. So this year that lands on November 1st at 9 a.m. Central Time. So we hope to see everyone there. And then we've got all of your burning questions. Can I have a copy of the slides? Yes. Will you get a recording? Yes. And will you get IGP CEUs? Yes, yes, and yes. Keep an eye on your inbox. All of these things will be delivered via email within 24 to 48 hours after the event is over. If you've got any questions or need any help with those resources, feel free to reach out to education@arma.intl.org. And, with that, a couple housekeeping things to also keep in mind. Our panelists can only see questions in the Q&A chat. So please utilize the Q&A chat to the Q&A box to put your questions for our experts today. That way we can make sure that those get answered. And please feel free to engage, use the chat feature for comments and feedback. We also love those reaction tools. I've seen a few, celebratory horns and hand claps and all that stuff go off. So please continue to utilize that. And then with that, I, want to take a second to thank our friends at Access. It's without their sponsorship, we would not be able to bring you programming and important information that we have for you today. So we hope when you're considering services and content for your organization, you consider companies like Access who support you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy and Keith, and they've got some great content for you guys. So Wendy and Keith, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wendy Ryan. I'm the Senior Product Manager for the Carta line over here at Access. I've been with Access for about 6 years. I've been in HR software for 15 years. Prior to that, I was with IBM Smarter Workforce. So I've been working in the HR space for a very long time. And how about Keith, how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Wendy. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Keith Simon. I am a product analytics and operations director with Access. I get to interact with prospects, customers, and our internal product and operations team to help address records management use cases. Thank you again for joining.
Oh, so before we get started, I was wondering if you could drop an emoji, let us know, have you ever heard of Access before? Some folks.
There you go.
Okay. Now, those are all thumbs. Can you give me a smiley face if you've heard of the Carta product or maybe had a demo or know something about Carta HR? There's a shocked face. I don't know about that. And then just one last question. This is probably going to be a very small group. If you have ever talked to me or Keith, either on a demo at SHRM or HR Tech, I did not have gray hair back then, so this is new. But so if not, then you're going to have the pleasure of meeting us for the first time today, and hopefully we can answer a bunch of your questions and get a good discussion going about consolidating records post-acquisition in an efficient manner. So over the past 6 years here on Carta, Keith and I have had the privilege of working with a really broad spectrum of companies on their HR record consolidation projects. So we're hoping to shed some light today on the processes that we've been using, the things that we have to consider, and maybe some solutions around that that will hopefully help you to improve your compliance and your efficiency. Depending on how, what people are into, thank you, what people are into, we can veer in different directions and go deep. But a lot of this stuff that we're saying is we're just giving you things to think about because your situation could vary on a number of factors. So why don't we move on to slide 3? Slide 3. There we go. Before we get into the details, I want to give you guys some basic review of some basic concepts so that we know that when we're talking, we're all talking on the same page. So I'll try to get through this fairly quickly. How many of you are familiar with this type of a wheel here? Oh, I have 2 of those. Okay. Okay, so we don't have to spend too much time on this. I wanted to just kind of bring up the point that we're living in kind of a unique turning point now. It's like, the way I like to say it is, it's like that salamander that's coming out of the water for the first time, taking its first steps on land. We're kind of at an evolutionary point where we're moving from this very, very paper-oriented set of processes towards digitization very quickly. And some people are going to have different levels of comfort with that. So why don't we move on? I mean, we get this, that, there's some offsite storage, some digitization. Let's go on to, can we go back to the, model? So gosh, I'm off to a rough start, guys. There we go. There we go. The efficiency model. So, what I wanted to talk about here was the maturity. This is has everybody seen this chart before? Can you drop me an emoji? No. Okay. So, all right, some people have. Yeah. So this is going to be important in our discussion. The maturity model is kind of a high level view of where an organization is at. But when you look at the different stages of information management lifecycle, you can imagine how a company that is transformative, maybe in security and digitization, may not have an automated system for monitoring compliance or automating disposition based on governance policies. So while this kind of we know this is a nice steps, and it generally is indicative of where you are on your developmental journey, but there, you always have to ask yourself, what is their maturity in each part of that journey, which may or may not be complete. They might have all their records digitized, but they're still using paper application forms, for example. So usually I think most people are in the middle. I will say that I have seen really large companies that are in the not managed or in development phases, and I've seen really small companies be transformative. So it's always interesting to see what you come up with when you're presented with the challenge of integration. So this is the information life cycle. Let's keep going. I think we had the slides backwards from my notes. Okay, so I wanted to review this little bit. This is really the why do we care? I mean, I'm sure everyone knows this, but I like to review the mission statement before we get started so we can strive to move forward towards maturity and implementing efficiency in our records management. We want to ensure compliance and privacy. You want to enforce the consistent information governance. That means not only having a good policy, but a good way to execute on that policy. So there's not just sitting there, and we'll go into some details on that in a bit. We want to stay ahead of regulatory change. You want to make sure that not only are you able to know when things are changing, but understand what that means for your company and be set up in a way that's flexible so that you can easily change your policies and execution on those policies without having to go back and start from scratch or commission a big project. So you want to be able to be flexible going forward. You want to set yourself up in a place where you can, and that will reduce your risk of penalties and exposure. And we'll go into detail on what all of that means in a moment.
Hey,
You want
Wendy,
to Yep.
sorry, I just want to jump in. That first bullet under increased performance, that to
Yep.
me really is about the platform you use to manage your digital records. It can, help you securely share records, make you much more efficient in your records processes. So I think that's another key thing around optimizing your records management.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So and implementing best practices, and increasing performance. Increasing performance is going to be huge. Because, and I will talk about that more in a minute, because your records managers are hard to come by nowadays, and you want to make sure that they're doing the correct things, that they're working on, organization and policy, and not retrieving a record or, going through an audit log by, without any assistance. You want to have the tools to, you want to have the tools to do what you need to do, right? So that you can get stuff done faster and not get bogged down in the minutia and the busy work. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is really where we start to go over what we're going to talk about today. So I want to cover the more general challenges here, and then we'll go into a little bit of detail later. But I also want to see how many of these resonate with you. We're going to have after we talk about this, we'll have a little poll. But if you want to drop an emoji while I'm talking about this slide, if there's something that really interests you, that's going to help us later on know where we're going to focus in the time that we have. But so the first one would be that records are stored in multiple systems, often with very different processes and taxonomies. And you've got to somehow, they're basically, speaking two different languages, and you've got to make them talk to each other. So we'll be going into that. Even at the same maturity level in the same industry, they can have drastic differences that can make staying compliant or even locating those records really complex, time-consuming processes. So we're going to go over, some issues around that and some thought processes that you may want to go through there. But yeah, it's when they're not in the same maturity level, sometimes it's even easier because you're starting with nothing. But and then when you come with two people at the same maturity level, they may have come to that level in very different ways, and you have to translate it. So we'll go over that in a moment. Employees can have multiple folders in different systems. So you may be consolidating two companies in the same industry in the same region, and they have a lot of overlapping employees. So you want to be able to make sure that you don't have duplicates of records, or that you're not, keeping more than. So we'll talk about that in a minute, because there's a lot of thought that has to go into what do you do? Do you want to keep them separate? And we have some customers who have a good logical reasons for keeping them separate, and some, companies that, you don't want to have them filling out multiple paperwork if they're currently working for two companies or if they have worked for that company in the past. And what is it? Consolidating cybersecurity, legal hold orders, mandate information protection, cybersecurity. Just having a record isn't enough if you don't know what you have or can't control access to it. In some acquisitions, digital documents may not even have a consistent naming convention. You may have, every manager has a folder with the same file names, or it's like it's not. I've seen all over the board. But you may not even have any idea what you have. And then which means you can't apply any kind of policies towards it. In some acquisitions, digital documents may not even. I did that. Electronic records and compliance and scalability requires destruction of outdated information. So it's not enough to have a policy. You have to be able to execute on it. Back in the day, it used to be okay to say, I have to retain these documents for at least this amount of time. So I might as well just keep everything, because that way I don't have to worry about not having something I'm supposed to keep. But now, where we have, more and more regulations like GDPR and California privacy coming from the other direction, you can't keep it. But even beyond that, even beyond, policies and regulations saying that you have to destroy documents you don't need anymore, you also have, costs that are associated with it. Digital storage is fairly cheap. Physical storage is not, but it still becomes a heavy weight. You get so many documents, finding them, becomes a problem, and they're really just kind of sitting there taking money out of your pocket. Records management complexity calls for additional skills that are hard to come by. We talked about that a little bit. It's really hard to find experienced record managers nowadays. You want your record managers focused on policies and not mundane tasks. Changing laws and privacy regulations impact information. That's, we talked about that a little bit. Information protection legislation, GDPR, California privacy. They're adding more wrinkles, and there are more tasks that need to be done. And this is not just talking about just disposition of records that are over. You have to be able to present documents to employees when they ask for them. So everything has to be ready and packaged, and you have to be able to check to see if there are legal holds on anything, or if there's a reason why you can't share it, with the user. And you have to balance what you legally can share and what you legally have to share with what policies you have. So, or whether or not you're involved with a case. So you need to be able to manage all of that stuff that's starting to stack up, that can easily be overlooked if you don't have good policies in place. Legislation is constantly changing, and it's important to have retention policies and disposition strategies that can change with them, that can be scalable. You want to be able to easily have a review every year, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but you want to be able to implement those quickly, without it being every year having like a 3-month project, right? So there are tools available. There is software available, and that can provide you with citations. There's obviously your legal team, and there are folks that can help, but getting a process involved so that as legislation changes, you can keep up with it in a timely manner, is becoming more and more important. All right, let's move to slide 7. Do we want to do the oh, I believe the poll is after this one. Okay, so now that we've reviewed some of the basics, these are more topics for today. So we're going to talk about consolidating records. We're going to talk about how to deal when you have different level of maturity between two companies, and we're going to talk about varying record formats. Somebody has JPEGs and somebody has a proprietary file. It's like you have to be able to get them all together in a manner where you have a consistent set of records. So when you go and look up somebody's Form X, it's going to be the same, no matter where it came from, or maybe you don't. But we'll talk about those choices in a minute, because again, there's the ideal world, and then there's practical, and what you're really going to need, what's going to really create risks, and what's going to create costs, and how to manage that. Consolidating data. So consolidating records is one thing. These are images and folders and sometimes digital information. You have to get all aligned. Consolidating data can be even harder. You might have completely different metadata schemas, and maybe they translate, maybe they don't, but you have to combine them. And you have to know what you need to keep, what you don't need to keep, and sometimes that's really tricky. So we'll talk about that in a moment. You might have employees with multiple IDs. So if they worked 10 years ago at company X and now they're coming to company Y has bought company X, you should probably know that these are the same people. And that's harder than you think. This is because multiple IDs is a positive, is a good thing to have, because at least you have two unique identifiers. Whereas if some companies where they had no employee ID, then you have to figure out how to match. And let me tell you, there's a lot of people with the same name in living in the same towns. So we'll get to that in a moment. And again, you might have duplicates as well, which is kind of talked about that. Replacing legacy systems and processes. This is a tough one. We'll talk about this some more, but this is, involved in how quickly do you migrate from one to the other? What are the factors you need to consider when you're doing that? And keeping legacy systems can be costly and often redundant, but getting out of it is not as easy. It's not an easy proposition. So you need to consider when you're doing it, what is the cost versus, what you're doing. We'll talk about that in a second. You want to make sure that you're aligning policies, and this is this can be very difficult as well. I'll get into detail because, for example, if you're merging two companies that are in different industries or in different geographical areas, the retention for their records may be different. And that's a lot of stuff that you got to kind of cross to make sure that that you're covered, because it may be dependent on the home office. I'd be curious to know that too. So, or thinking about migrating systems in the future, or has, someone who has migrated and is still having problems with leftover pieces. But all right, so we're dealing with the policies that must be maintained. So you might be acquiring a company and shutting down half of it, but you still have to make sure you keep retention on the records for the part that you're not using anymore. So those are some things that we'll talk about in a moment. Let's see. I think we can go to the poll now. So I'm kind of, before we move forward, I would like to see whether any of these items are of concern to you. You can check as many as you want. Either that you're familiar with in the past, that you're worried about facing in the future, or that you're facing currently. If you're acquiring a company that is immature and your system is mature, if you're acquiring a company that is more mature, and you're not sure whether to move everything up to their system or to move everything back down the maturity to yours. The company that you're acquiring has saved every scrap of paper ever produced, and you don't know what you can and can't destroy. Shoe boxes, the cooler in the back office is full of old documents, stuff that you don't even know what you have. Maybe you don't know, what you can keep, what you can destroy. They've got, the company picnics, meal selections from 10 years ago, that kind of thing. Copies of employee records in file formats you've never heard of, or just difficult to view file formats. That does happen. We've handled a lot of cases where they were either proprietary file formats or stuff we'd never seen before, having to translate that, or even in databases that you've never heard of, and you've got to somehow extract documents from them. What about employees who work or worked at both companies and you have duplicate records? If you have that problem, and several of the processes and systems being redundant, so you have two processes for doing things and having to deprecate the older system, or maybe deprecate the newer system. I don't, but one of them has to go. And then lastly, both companies have their own retention policies and they don't align, and you have to figure out how to make that work. I think we're going to give everybody a quiet
Wendy, we're going
moment
to
for a
give
sec.
everyone just a second it takes a little while to get all the results in. So we'll give everyone a second to participate, and then I'll post the results.
Okay. And if there are things that you were hoping to get out of this webinar that are not on this poll, it's okay to put that in the chat. Yeah. Okay. That's a pretty good mix. Okay. All right, you guys can continue answering as we go, I think, or is that? Yeah. Okay. Stacy, I could definitely handle that.
I went ahead and relaunched if everyone wants to, anyone who didn't get to participate would like to participate.
Deborah, it's I'm mostly dealing with mergers and acquisitions, but it's really if you come into a company and they have a bunch of legacy systems, this also applies. Sometimes there's systems that you moved off of that are still stuck around, or you're getting a new system and you want to make sure that you know what to do with the old data.
Wendy, I think quite a few people also said, they have tons of paper and they don't know what they can destroy.
This will help with that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an example of the relatively mature and immature along their digital journey. And this is a great place to be right now, obviously, because this is where we're on the cusp of that. Really, we're all in that transition from paper processes to digital processes, which can be much more efficient and easier to use it once you get the process done. But getting those processes moved to digital is definitely something that's difficult. So let's talk a little bit about you want to be able to find. So what are some of the issues with records? So with getting records into the new digital systems, or getting getting two sets of records aligned, you got to find the records. And this can be a really difficult problem because sometimes records are like just stuck in SharePoint. Maybe they're organized, maybe they're in folders. Sometimes the folders have what kind of document they are. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes things are localized. When you have a company with a number of locations, they might be saved in localized SharePoints, or formerly that would have been like someone's desktop, which we don't generally do. It's generally up online somewhere, but they're still kind of managed site by site. And you want to get everything aligned. You want to get everything aligned. So SharePoint is great because you can put records there and you can share them, and you don't have to make copies, which is important. But then finding them, if you can't really enforce to the point that you want the kind of metadata that you need around the documents to be able to do the processes you need in the future. But yes, it is really of course you can enforce a super organization on SharePoint. It just takes a lot of effort. And then you also have the problem is not only do you know where the records are, the SharePoint, the cooler in the back office, inside of the manager's drawer in each individual location, finding all of the things, getting them together, that can be costly because you're going to want to ship them all to a central location. Even going forward, that even for back files, or going forward, you're going to want to ship those to a general location, or you're going to scan them, and then you have to have handling that. But you also have to figure out what documents might not be records, especially when you're doing an acquisition. There may have been reasons to save all kinds of employee stuff, like maybe an award, or maybe that they won first place in the costume contest, or some other document that they made, or speech that they made, or something. There's a lot of stuff in there that maybe isn't even actually a document. So that's the first thing to kind of say, all right, we're going to determine what we want to keep, what we don't want to keep, what we need to move over. If you're really skittish about that, then there are programs where you do something we call scan on demand. So you take your documents that you're going to need, your active files, and you scan those, and then fold, for really old documents that you still need to retain, or documents that belong to employees that are no longer with the company. You can keep in paper because the likelihood you're going to access that is pretty low, but you want to be able to access it, if you need to. And there's cost variables in there that you have to consider. So depending on the number of times you're going to need to go back to that records, if you only have to look up one record in 10 years, you can spend a lot of money finding that record. You don't have to do that lookup in the front, right? But if it's something where you think you're going to have a lot of them accessed over time, those are the ones you want to digitize and move into the new system, because that will cut down on your costs on retrieval. But if you have your data all complete, it then becomes easy. So just whether it does, and then so then you do need to know whether you want to convert records. And then when you're converting records, you're going to have the problems of, what do you want to do with it? So maybe the new system has everything was digital born, and they're all searchable PDFs that were created online, saved online. And then you have another company where they're all paper, and there may be, carbon copies in a folder somewhere, and maybe they're not even legible. So then the question is, can you take those documents and do OCR on them so that you can search them the way you would a normal PDF? And there is a cost associated with that, and sometimes it's worth it and sometimes it's not. If you don't need to be able to search within the text of a document, then just scan it and put it up. Don't worry about the OCR, and then you'll have metadata that will help you to find it. But there are cases where you are going to want to look for words within a document. And that's what you have to, because there is, you have to decide whether or not that's worth it to you to be able to do that. But if all your new stuff is searchable, the old stuff, you may not need it to be searchable. You gotta make those choices, right? So it may not be exactly like the new records, but it's good enough. You also may have older file formats, or somebody may have been saving in a database old digital forms. So you still have all the information needed for it to be a valid digital document, but maybe you don't want to store it that way because you want to be able to produce it if you need to go to court. So you want those in a nice format. Those are things that you want to consider. Like, you could leave it in that database where it's not really accessible. You can convert it to PDF, or you can just move the metadata over. But you'd have to look at that and see if that was something you want to do. We've had a number of cases where these old systems, they're not supported anymore. It's not secure to keep the data on there, but the data all just comes out as an extract. And then you have to decide how you want to work with it going forward. Do you want to convert it to a PDF so that you have a nice document? Do you want to save that as data so that you can just search the data? And then you would have to, set up your system accordingly with a number of fields to maintain that data, which then becomes really cumbersome because you have a lot of stuff going on there. So it's, and you could leave it in the old system and do what they, I think it's called air locking, where you just take it away from the internet. So the only one person in the company could access the data, but it's there and you're just retaining it because it's old data. It's not new data. You don't need it anymore. You just keep it on one machine in a safe location, because the odds that you're going to need it are pretty low. I mean, is that a great situation? No. Are there kind of affordable ways to get it out? Yes, but it is going to be a cost. But once a piece of software that's an old piece of software is no longer supported, you are going to want to get away from it because it's going to become insecure. They're no longer keeping up with new styles of attack. And then sometimes, so what I've kind of been talking about is when you want to just abandon something or just start over. If you have a system that is going to be extremely costly to move stuff out. There are times when you're just going to want to re-get those forms from the employees, but still maintain some kind of a record that when they started in the old company. But that's not the best scenario. You want to be able to keep it if you can. There are a number of systems for helping you find and identify records, which we'll get to when we talk to metadata. But really, this is just this one here. We're just talking about individual records, whether they be paper, whether they be a bunch of receipts in a shoebox, and knowing what that is in the shoebox. There are a number of methods for that. There are tools, there are digital tools that can help you kind of go through them and identify text. There's also automated processes which you can do automated document identification. Best way to organize paper records. You'd want to have some kind of a digital component. So the best way that we have to organize organize paper records is to basically you have to figure out what's in your box. And there are services to help with that. If you're going to go through the process of using AI or some kind of a digital scanning mechanism to identify what your records are, then you might as well scan them. But if you want to continue to maintain paper records, getting them into a system with scan on demand or a digital delivery is a good option, because then you can put your records into a centralized location as paper, and then as you need them, you can call in and say, hey, we need this set of records, and have them digitized, and then they're available online. And again, that's great for if you do not regularly access your records, or the records are not going to be regularly accessed, but you need to maintain them and you need to be able to get them when you need them. Then you don't have to do all the digitization up front. You can simply store them, and then when you need them, you can get them digitally delivered. And then that's the reason why that is a big save, is because in the old days you had a centralized location for managing paper records, and if somebody needed to get you a record, or if you needed to send copy of a record to someone, you got to pay FedEx, right? And that could get expensive really quickly. But with digital delivery, you get it in a centralized digital location. You have controls over who's accessing the documents. You can also control and monitor all of their activities. Yes, once the files are digitized, you can retrieve them virtually, and you also have all of the audit logging about everyone's access to the records. So when you need to pull up a report for GDPR, for example, you could say this record was looked at by so and so for this amount of time, because you don't send you can, if that is your choice, but you can send a downloaded PDF. But if you do that, then you have many copies lying around of your PDF, and that becomes insecure. What you want to do is to keep everything in one place, and then be able to share those records so that people can, so that you only have one copy of the record, and you're monitoring everyone who's looking at it, so that you can later go back and say, we've had complete control of this record. We know it was opened by so and so, viewed for this amount of time, and closed at this time. And you can also control with permissions, which we'll get to in a bit, how, who can access the record. So, you have very tight controls on it. But, where if you're sending it in a FedEx package, you can have a chain of custody, but that doesn't mean that, you're not going to get it every step of the way. So you can be pretty tight with paper, but with digital, you're logging everybody's activity with it, and you're also able to share it and track who's sharing it, and control permissions for people who might want to see it outside the company if it's required.
And Wendy, just to add on to that, so once you have digital records, you can change the way you do business with those records. So you don't have to do it the old way. You don't have to rely on email. A lot of the systems have very efficient and secure ways to share records. So once you go the digital route, you have the advantage of leveraging new processes that make you much more efficient, as Wendy mentioned, much more secure. Lots of advantages to doing that digital route.
Yeah. So are there any more questions on the records, on the paper records, records themselves, like the actual records? I'm going to move on to data next. But if anybody has any questions, any more questions about the about digitization or whether or not you're going to keep it in paper. What I'd say is this one, the other benefit to digitizing, which I think I have a slide. Let's see what the next slide is. I think I have a slide on digitization. Yeah, so I mean, so we're talking about the benefits of taking your paper and going digital. You can improve the efficiency of the business processes. We've talked about that a little bit. You can provide disaster recovery. This is really important. If it's paper and it's in your facility and you have a fire or a flood or some other natural disaster, then you might lose that document. Even if it's in a warehouse, it's probably more secure. But you never know. I mean, the world's crazy right now. So anything could happen. If it's digital, it is usually you have a disaster recovery plan, which means that you have separate servers that are geographically distant, or server groups or clouds so that if one is completely goes down from a tornado or whatever, then the other one is still up and running. You never have to worry about not having that record. And you have that peace of mind of it not, getting lost. So it's even if like there's some kind of a attack on the entire East Coast, you still got it on the West Coast. So again, we've talked about secure digital access regards its physical location. If you do go the route of storing your paper and then you get it digitized, or if you digitize everything, then you can, the work from home becomes easier. The getting stuff to your lawyer becomes easier. Getting documents filled out and back to you becomes easier because it's all in the cloud, right? You don't have to get a form to someone and then have them mail it back or scan or fax it back or scan it and send it back. It's just all in the cloud, and it makes things cheaper. I mean, there's always going to be situations where paper may be the optimal choice, where you can't require people to have a system. That's becoming less and less of a thing as we go forward. I would say if you go back 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there were quite a few situations where nobody had access at home, or it was just like the facilities didn't have the proper equipment or whatever was needed to go fully digital. But that's not, since the pandemic, that's not really a problem anymore. You may have to provide a phone for some employees, which may not always be a good idea, but there are ways of handling if you want to do everything digital. But yes, we do know the challenges. We have a customer that all of their employees are on boats in the ocean doing work. So it used to be really hard for them to do anything digitally because they just didn't have internet access and to get stuff back. But now that's a bit better, where they are able to have devices on their ships. So that things are, even the most impossible situation, it's becoming easier to use digital. Yep, eliminating silos. So, if you have paper in one office and not in the other, and it's hard to track it down, if it's online and you have access to see it, you can get there pretty easily. Security by access, by controlling access. On digital, it becomes very easy to control who can see what, right? Like, I mean, of course, if it's in a file room and you have to go in and, you have to prove that, you have the right to access that file, yes, but this is much easier in that you have gone in and said, people can see, you can set the rules as to what people can see. So for example, a manager could see their employee files, but then beyond that, not just their employee files, they may not be able to see medical, of course, right? Or some things that are private. So you can keep those all in the same employee folder, but just restrict access on who can see them. Because I mean, a folder in digital it's a concept in our head, it's not a real thing. But but you are able to say, you know, I can look at my direct reports documents, but only these document types, not, you know, others. So it becomes, you don't have to then keep track of two folders to separate that if you're used to working in paper. Okay, and then automated retention policies. That's like the pie in the sky goal, right? You get your retention policies completed, which is a big goal anyways. But once you've got those policies completed, you want to be able to execute on them or they don't mean anything. And you want to have a process in place, sorry, for making sure that that you're not that you get a proper approval process on removing those documents. But you know, you don't want a process that's so cumbersome that you never get things deleted, or so costly. And a lot of people are like, well, we haven't done disposition because of the cost. And generally with paper, you have the shredding costs, right? But once it's in digital, the cost was all up front. There's no additional cost to just getting rid of it. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And this is just a little bit about backfile scanning. And like I said, there are two options here. There's an option where you can digitize everything, get it in there, and then, you know, you can look it up easily, and then you don't have to worry about it going forward. However, if you have a lot of old legacy records, it's probably more economical to split that up and store a certain amount with the ability to have on demand, and then digitize the rest. That will control your costs over time. And, you know, of course, if you store it with the right place, digitizing, disposition can be easy and fairly automated. And then everyone knows that once you digitize your records, you don't have to worry about paying for storage facilities. And I already talked a little bit about how it helps with the remote work. So let's move on to the next one. All right, consolidating data from multiple systems. So we talked about this a little bit. So we'll see where we can dive into in here. But if you have, sure, yes. If you have multiple IDs dealing with duplicates, so multiple or no IDs. So you have this situation where you have people, you know, coming into a company and they have a set of employees and you have a set of employees, and you want to make sure that you don't have duplicates, or maybe you do have people with the same name. You need to have a unique identifier for each of those, right? They need to have an employee ID. I would not recommend using their social security number because that presents a bunch of PPI issues. PII issues. But I would, yeah, so I would try not to have a social security number as your unique identifier. If you have to store it, you have to store it, but unique identifier is a bit of a sticky place. You're definitely going to have it in some documents. And probably between two companies, they're going to have their own numbering system, so they're not going to match up. So you're going to need to find other ways of knowing if you do have a duplicate. You're going to, so there's two reasons why the IDs are important. The first one is you know, when you're dealing with duplicates. The second one is that you may have these other systems, right? Like you may have Workday and UKG, right? And you want to be able to still access the stuff in Workday until you've got it all moved out. So you may want to, when you're consolidating the data for the two employees, you may want to keep both for a while, create a new field for a legacy ID so that you can easily look it up, or you may want to keep a mapping somewhere so that when you're going to look up, it's easy to go back and find the documents. But that's going to depend on your particular situation. When you don't have any IDs and you have to look for duplicates, then it becomes difficult because you can't look at the name, just the name, maybe the name and location. It may take a lot of digging. There are automated processes that you can put in where we think these are matches, that at least makes that part easy. And then you can compare the data and see, are they really the same? Do we want to merge these folders or not? And a lot of software has tools where you can look at them side by side and say, oh, is this the same person or not? And then merge the folders. Sorry. Last week I had no voice, so this is much better. When to add fields and when not to. This can be, you may have, you may have a lot of data in both databases, and you don't necessarily want to bring everything over. So you need to take the time to determine what of the data that you have is something you're going to use going forward. You definitely need to keep the data that you're going to need for your retention policies, or for any retention policies that you're maintaining from the original system. And you definitely want, so you're going to want to make sure your policies, you have to figure out what you have, then you have to figure out your policies, then you can determine what data you want to keep or get rid of. I would say go sparingly, but make sure you have everything you're legally required to keep. Because otherwise, if especially if you have fields that are similar, and this can get crazy. If you have somebody who's putting in NY and somebody who's writing out New York, for example, or somebody who puts in, and New York is a good one to use because someone who puts in Manhattan and someone who puts in New York City, or you might have two dates that are in completely different formats, so that you're going to have to do some translation. You probably don't want to keep both of those unless there is a reason to. So there are sometimes reasons where you want to keep both New York and Greenwich Village. So you're going to have to decide which of those you want to keep. But that's a bit of a process of comparing. Same thing if you get a bunch of documents and the previous system is not as far along in their maturity, and they have not got metadata for all of their records, but you still want that metadata to be able to locate the records either digitally or on paper. There are processes where you can, in software that either we could use or whoever you would hire to help you with this, can easily go through series of forms and pull out data, either by an OCR or by a human intervention, depending on the level of accuracy that you require, and how legible the documents are. We've got especially when you're dealing with things like medical records, you might have, laserfiche of handwritten cards from the 40s that you still have to keep. So that may not be an option for that. You may want to use a human for that. Whereas you may have if you have typed documents that are really easy to read, then you could automate that process to extract it. Yes, thank you, Keith. So OCR is when a computer takes all of the words on the page visually. It's optical. The O is for optical, and it turns it into text. It's magic. But that way you can get the information out of the page. Generally, if this isn't you may not need that. I mean, that's at a very rare occasion when you need that. Probably you can get the most from knowing the information about the employee that you're going to get from your HRIS system, and a lot of your retention policies are going to be based around the information in their that's in your HRIS system. So you're going to want to identify what your trigger dates are over there and what information will inform your policies, and bring that data over. And your document type. So you need to know the document type. Now, there are ways of getting the document type that don't involve humans or OCR, where you can have basically it recognizes the patterns within the document. So either it's going to see some words that are the same in the document, or it's going to say, oh, this document looks just like that document. And then you go through a process of learning where you say, well, computer says, I think these are the same document. And you say, yeah, that's the same. And eventually it gets to the point where it can do it on its own. And then that way, if you have like large volumes, like millions of employee records that you don't know what they are, the computer can kind of group them. The AI can group them into, we think these are the same document type. We think these are the same document type. And then you can say, okay, that's a this, or that's a, this is an I-9, or this is a vacation request. So you can use the AI to figure out what that is. And we have, I've worked with multiple solutions around that, and they're getting much, much uncannily better, of course, as AI progresses to being able to say, oh yeah, this is what you have. I don't know what they are, but you can tell me what they are, but this is what I recognize. So that's how you can, so once you, if you literally, if you just have the HRIS data and you have the document type and maybe you have a few pieces, dates from the document, that's probably enough for the records. You don't have to go in and get all of the data. There are situations when you do, but commonly in HR, the employee metadata is the big driver for retention.
Hey, Wendy, there was a question on, can OCR recognize handwritten?
So the answer is yes, but within reason, right? Like if you can't read it without your glass, if I can't read it without my glasses, the OCR at this point still can't figure out what it is. But yes, and it actually does a pretty good job of it. Like if it's a doctor's cursive signature, maybe not, but but generally it is able to find it. And what it does is it learns from humans, right? So it's not in the first few rounds, it doesn't just say I know everything, right? Yet maybe next week, but right now you have a human would go through and say, okay, like that says, I think it says this, and then instead of the human going through and typing it all out, the human just goes yes, no, yes, no, yes, and the computer learns and gets better at it over time. I mean, it's hard to learn when you have handwriting from like 100,000 different employees, right? But
so I think there's two
better.
things. Yeah. So on the OCR system, I think there's a couple things you want to look for. One is accuracy. The other is efficiency. So accuracy means when it tells you this is what it is it right? Did it interpret that handwriting to what the handwriting actually is? That's number one. Number two is sometimes it doesn't know an answer. So that's your efficiency of how many samples, what's the efficiency of giving an answer, and then what's the accuracy, is the answer right? So those are some of the things to look at. Obviously, as Wendy said, handwriting varies all over. That's more difficult. A more form-based record, that's more easy to identify.
Yeah, and we have conversion services teams, and that's they're like really talented, but they spend most of their day, they see things getting and then they can intervene when the AI doesn't really work. And sometimes they're faster than the AI. We've clocked them, but they're just really good. So there's tools that assist, and then there's human intervention and some combination of that. If you have like really difficult stuff, we've handled really difficult stuff. Oh my gosh. All right, so we're running short on time, so I'm going to pop to the next slide. Okay, so keeping or replacing legacy systems, there's a number of things that you're going to want to consider. We talked a little bit about it so far, but you need to understand the cost of maintaining the system. How much are you paying the company for the system? Is the company still supporting the system? If the company isn't secure, I mean, is no longer making security updates, then that can be problematic. You could be, if the company isn't up with modern privacy, that could also, if the old software is not up to modern privacy, then that could also be a problem. It's also sometimes with these older systems, you have like maybe one account left or one person who can still access it, which then becomes a drain on that resource. Is probably one of your better, more senior resources who spending maybe too much time retrieving those old documents. So it's and there are many reasons why you kept it there. I mean, the reasons could be that the cost of getting it out was expensive. I would say if you have one of those systems, reevaluate it, because it may not be as expensive as it was. Especially with as AI assistance, it's getting easier to get documents out of older systems. It may be because you don't need those documents, like the same thing we talked about with the paper. You don't access them. So what's the point of moving it over? Maybe it's not really a drain. Maybe, you can keep it air gapped, so that no one from the internet can access it. And it's just this one system. You're still going to have that problem of, if you have it on one system and lightning strikes the building, then that's gone. So it's good to get it out. But again, you got to weigh your risk versus your costs there. And in some cases, it's a really good, it's really going to end up making more money than it costs. And then the legal risks of keeping those systems: are you going in there and pulling out documents that are past their retention date? Are you in compliance with GDPR and privacy regulations? That you're not supposed to keep these documents for a certain amount of time. And when you have documents like that, even if it's on a server in in a back room that only one person can access, it's still a risk to have those documents lying around past the date that they should be destroyed. And then the soft costs are your employees going to be okay with losing the system that they've come to rely on? So let's say it's not such an old system and they've been using it a lot. You may want to slowly migrate them over to a new system rather than moving them too quickly, especially if it's going to make it hard for them to do their jobs on a daily basis. I think that's common sense. All right, next. Let me do this 1 minute. Considerations when aligning policies. So, I mean, the real takeaway here is you need to get legal involved. You shouldn't be doing this on your own. You can do basic stuff on your own, but there's going to be a lot of conflicts and a lot of very specific things that will be problematic. So you want to start with your document classification, know what you have, at least knowing, what you think you have, right? And then you want to understand when there are conflicts due to preferences or variations in location and industry, because you may have a retention policy in Boston that is completely different from a retention policy in Texas, and maybe those retention policies aren't even about the state of the office. Maybe it's nowadays, especially, the person can be living anywhere, and you got to understand what that means, and what office you use. So you have to. So there's a lot of work to be done with, you can't just say, all right, we're going to put everything under the policy we have in our Boston office, because you want to make sure that if there's any industry changes or if there's any local regulations that you need to follow, you need to make sure that you need to have that thoroughly checked out to make sure that there are no conflicts, because there are going to be situations where you have maybe a national law and a local law that are going to conflict, and you want to make sure that you have a way of handling that. And there is software that, once you've figured out there is this conflict, can then handle the conflict for you when it comes time to destroy that document. Always consult with counsel, because things change, and it's hard to figure out what law trumps the other law. So, for example, you have GDPR and you have your retention policies and you have a legal hold, and you got to figure out, do I destroy the document? Do I not destroy the document? Obviously, at a legal hold, you don't, but all of these things work together, and you got to make sure where the risk is greater when keeping a document. And then you want to make sure to do an automated audit to identify what records are missing. So something like a compliance, like we have a compliance monitor. It looks at what you're supposed to have for each employee, and then it can give you a report of what you don't have, and then give you actions to take, maybe automated actions to take to get those documents into the folder. So when you're bringing in, another company's documents, you've got, you think you've got everything, then you can go through and take a look and say, okay, what are we missing that we're supposed to have? And you can get a nice report that says, these people need to have these documents. Do you want to send out a request for them to fill them out online? Bam. So, and constantly monitoring that to make sure that you're in compliance and that everybody's folders are complete. I think that we're just about out of time. Do we have any time for questions?
We are out of time, but the content was great today. We appreciate everyone joining us and being a part of our session today. Again, we thank Wendy and Keith for bringing us this awesome content and access for supporting the event. Keep an eye on your email box for follow-up information about where to get your CU information. The slides and access to the recording will all be coming to your inbox in about 24 to 48 hours. And again, we hope to see you on a future ARMA event, whether it's online or at one of our 3 in-person events. So thank you again. Everyone have a great afternoon, and we're almost to the weekend, so I'll wish you a good weekend. Thank you.